Mercer Fabrication and Salvage, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. A Wednesday in late October, just past 2 in the afternoon. Claudette Fontaine arrived in a charcoal wool coat and low heels that were wrong for the gravel. Behind her walked Dennis Okafor from the Halifax Regional Municipalities Development Office, and 2 engineers from Fontaine Infrastructure Group, with matching hard hats they had not yet put on. Everett Marsh came down from the upper gantry in a welding jacket that had seen 12 winters. He did not remove his gloves. Claudette looked at the water, then at him. "Mr. Marsh, we'd seen what we needed to see." She turned, heels catching on the loose stone. "This site isn't viable. Take it back to what it is." Dennis Okafor did not follow her immediately. He stood a moment longer, then he went. Everett pulled his gloves tight and went back up the gantry. On Shore Road, a black government Suburban slowed at the chain-link gate. It did not stop. Not yet. Drop your city in the comments. Like the video if you want to see how this ends. And stay with us to the final scene. You won't want to leave early. The yard went quiet by 4:30. The grinders stopped first. Then the welding rigs. The men drove out in trucks with rust along the wheel wells and Tim Hortons cups on the dash. Everett and Marsh stayed behind to do what he did every Wednesday. Check the manifest against the morning's pulls, mark each item with a red grease pencil, and lock the storage bins in the order his father had taught him 20 years ago. He had been told 4 hours earlier that his site wasn't viable. He had not answered. He had gone back up the gantry and finished the cut. The words had found no purchase in him. He walked past where she had said them and they were still lying there on the gravel, doing nothing. At 5, he locked the gate and drove the truck east along the Dartmouth waterfront, past the ferry terminal, past the hockey rink, to Caledonia Elementary. He parked at the curb with 3 minutes to spare before the bell. His daughter Pip came out with her backpack listing to one side and a drawing she had rolled into a tube under her arm. She was 7. She climbed into the truck cab without help. She had been doing it herself since spring. "Mrs. DeChazen showed us pictures of great blue herons today." Did she? They stand in the water and they just wait. They don't chase anything, they just wait, and then it comes. "That's a patient bird." She said patience is a skill. She unrolled the drawing on her knees. It was a heron with legs like stilts and eyes that were very round and serious. "Daddy, what does unviable mean?" He looked at her. She was not looking up. She was adding a fish to the heron's beak with a chewed pencil she had produced from her coat pocket. "It means somebody decided something wasn't worth their time. It's rude." "It can be." They stopped at the yard for 10 minutes so Everett could sign a delivery note that had come in after he'd left the office. Pip walked along the fence line the way she always did, trailing her fingers along the chain link. She found a bronze fitting the size of her fist in the gravel near the drainage ditch and carried it to the truck like it was a discovery. She did not see the business card wedged under the wiper blade of the truck. Everett saw it when he came back. He took it without looking at it, folded it once, and put it in his chest pocket. At home in Woodside, he heated the lentil soup his neighbor Adele had brought over on Sunday. Adele Boudreau was 73, had lived next door for 31 years, and had decided after Everett's wife died that the Marsh household required a third presence at the supper table on weekday evenings. She came over at 6 with a loaf of bread she had baked that afternoon and a jar of mustard pickles that had been in her pantry since August. "How was the day?" she said. "It went." She tore the bread and set a piece beside his bowl. Woman came by. "You heard. Dennis Okafor's office called the Harper Authority this morning. Word travels." Everett ate. He did not say more. Adele did not push. She had known him since he was 9 years old and she understood the specific quality of his silences. Pip told Adele about the herons. Adele said she had seen 3 of them once standing in a row on the causeway in Dartmouth, each one looking at the water like they had an appointment with it. Pip said that was exactly right. After supper, Pip brushed her teeth and asked for the bird book from the bottom shelf. Everett read her 2 pages. She fell asleep before the third was finished. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her in the low light. The heron drawing on the nightstand pinned under a piece of sea glass she had found on McNabb's Island the summer before her mother stopped coming home. When he came back to the kitchen, Adele was at the door with her coat buttoned. She did not say goodbye. She pressed his arm once at the elbow, the way she had done since he was a boy. An old habit. It meant something he had never needed to have explained. He listened to her door close next door. He washed the bowls. He turned off the porch light. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded for a long time, listening to the dish drain and the creak of the house in the harbor wind and the slow, even breathing of his daughter down the hall. He took the business card out of his pocket and set it on the table without unfolding it. He looked at the folded rectangle for a moment. Then he opened it. Fontaine Infrastructure Group. Claudette Fontaine, President and Chief Executive Officer. He turned it face down. He went to bed at 10. He did not check his phone. Claudette Fontaine drove north on the McKay Bridge at 8:40 Thursday morning with a folder on the passenger seat and the harbor below her going flat gray in the October light. Her father had told her once that the only thing worse than a wrong decision was delivering its consequences by email. She had a formal findings letter to give in person. She had not slept well. She turned down Shore Road and pulled into Marsh Fabrication and Salvage and parked beside a truck that had salt damage along the running boards. Everett was at the east side of the yard, chalking measurements on a hull section that had come in from the Coast Guard Auxiliary Depot in Shearwater. He looked up when her car door closed. He did not change his expression. He went back to the chalk line. She walked across the gravel with the folder in her hand. Mr. Marsh, I'm here to deliver the findings letter in person. Fontaine Infrastructure won't be moving forward on the Shore Road Corridor project. You deserved a face, not a courier. He took the folder. He did not open it. He set it on the hood of his truck. Thank you, Miss Fontaine. That was all he said. She had prepared for argument. She had prepared for the particular anger of a man who feels he has been cheated. The raised voice. The demand for justification. The door left open for a counteroffer. She had not prepared for a man who received the news the way he received everything else, without theater, without performance, without any apparent need for her to feel better about what she had done. She was still standing on the gravel when the government Suburban from the day before turned off Shore Road and rolled through the gate. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out. He was in his late 50s, silver at the temples. The posture of someone who had once worn a uniform and never fully let it go. Behind him, a younger man in a dark blazer came around the vehicle and stood at the rear door. The man in the suit crossed the yard without looking at Claudette. He stopped 4 feet in front of Everett Marsh and stood straight. Chief Warrant Officer Marsh. It's been 6 years. The yard noise did not stop. A gull called twice over the water. The Suburban ticked on the gravel. Everett set down his chalk. He pulled off his work gloves 1 finger at a time. He did not salute. He stood the way a man stands when the ceremony has been returned to him, and he has chosen to set it aside. Commissioner. The word landed in the air between them. Claudette did not move. She was not certain what she had heard, only that the word Chief Warrant Officer was sitting somewhere in her chest, and she did not yet know what to do with its weight. The man was Real des Rocas, Deputy Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Corps of Engineers, retired, current civilian advisor to the Federal Department of National Defense Infrastructure Portfolio. He spoke clearly, and he spoke loud enough for Claudette to hear. I came to ask you to take a job. The Federal Infrastructure Office is assembling a civilian technical team for the structural assessment of 3 decommissioned Coast Guard facilities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. We need lead salvage coordinators with marine certification and heritage structure clearance. Yours is one of 4 yards on the Atlantic coast that qualifies. I came to ask in person. Everett listened without moving. Des Rogers turned for the first time and looked at Claudette Fontaine. Ms. Fontaine, in February of 2018, a federal survey vessel was taking on water in Halifax Harbor during a nor'easter. The vessel had a cracked weld at the keel. The crew sent a distress signal. The closest certified response wasn't the Coast Guard. It was Marsh Fabrication. Chief Warrant Officer Marsh brought his crew out in 4-meter seas and held a stabilizing cable for 2 hours while the repair was made. 11 people came home that night. One of them was a junior engineer from your father's firm. She had been on contract with the Federal Survey Office for 3 weeks. Claudette did not speak. She heard her own voice from the day before in her own ears. This site isn't viable. Take it back to what it is. Everett turned back to Desrochers. I appreciate the visit, Commissioner. I'm not coming back to contract work. Desrochers nodded. He reached into his breast pocket and set a card on the hood of Everett's truck beside the manila folder that Claudette had placed there 20 minutes ago. My door stays open. He turned and walked back toward the Suburban. The younger man was already at the driver's door. Before he opened it, he paused beside Claudette. He spoke low, into the sound of the yard. He doesn't talk about what he carries, ma'am. And if you need to know one more thing. He paused. Don't ask him about his wife. Not yet. The door closed. The Suburban rolled out of the yard and turned north toward the bridge. Claudette stood on the gravel and did not move. The wind off the Dartmouth waterfront brought the smell of salt and cold metal and the distant ferry horn. She had not known he was a chief warrant officer. She had not known he had saved a crew in 4-meter seas. She had not known he had a wife who was gone. Across the yard, Everett put his gloves back on and returned to the chalk line. He did not look at the card on the hood of his truck. He did not look at her cruise. At 11:10, Claudette called her father from the parking lot of a coffee shop on Portland Street in Dartmouth. She did not trust her voice anywhere that required composure. Tell me about the February survey. Henri Fontaine was quiet for a moment. Then he began. It was the 14th of February, 2018. The surveyor-class vessel Pellerin lost buoyancy in a northeast gale in the outer harbor. We had a junior engineer on board, Sabine. She was 26. She had been with us 10 weeks. The distress went out, and nobody moved fast enough except the salvage yard on Shore Road. The man who came out was Mars. He and 2 of his crew were in the water for 40 minutes, in conditions the Coast Guard wouldn't clear their own boats for. Sabine came home. All 11 came home. I called to thank him afterward and he said it was the work. Henri paused. Claudette, I don't know what you said to him yesterday, but whatever it was, you owe him better than a findings letter. She drove to the RCMP Marine Depot off Barrington Street where her father had maintained a supply account for the firm for 18 years. The clerk at the desk recognized the company name. He brought down a tin of dark roast from the back shelf, the same local Dartmouth roaster the Federal Marine Office had stocked since the 90s. Navy blue label. Ground course. At 2:15, she returned to Marsh Fabrication and Salvage. She did not call ahead. She filled a metal thermos from her car and walked across the gravel and set it on the hood of his truck. My father said you'd remember the roast. Everett looked at the thermos for a long moment. He picked it up. He unscrewed the cap. He poured into 2 enamel cups from the shelf inside the office door and held one out to her without a word. They sat on the wooden step at the office entrance. They drank the coffee. The harbor wind moved between the hull sections and the salt smell came with it. Adele Boudreau, who had come by to drop off a thermos of her own that she had entirely not been needed for, walked past on her way to the gate and saw Claudette on the step. She stopped. She looked at Everett. He did not look up. She gave the smallest nod and kept walking. It was the first time in 4 years she had nodded at anyone sitting on that step who was not family. Pip came out of the back office with a piece of driftwood she had been carrying since Tuesday. She stopped in front of Claudette and held it out. Are you the lady from yesterday? Yes. He didn't look very happy when he left. Claudette did not know how to answer that. She looked at the driftwood. Can I see it? Pip handed it over and watched her turn it. There was a streak of copper oxide along the grain that had turned the wood a faint green. That means it was in the water near old fittings, Everett said. He had not looked up from his cup. Pip took the wood back, considered it with new seriousness, and went back inside. Everett watched his daughter hand something to this woman, and he said nothing. His coffee cup held the heat. The harbor moved past the fence line. Neither of them spoke for a while, which was not uncomfortable. and which surprised Claudette enough that she noticed it. That evening, after she had driven home to her apartment in the south end of Halifax and turned her work phone face down, a voicemail arrived on her personal number. A man named Severin Cloutier, who ran Cloutier Waterfront Development out of an office in Bedford, Nova Scotia, invited Fontaine Infrastructure to participate in a consortium he was assembling. He called it the Dartmouth Shore Corridor Initiative. He said the prospectus would follow. The prospectus arrived at 11:40 at night. She opened it at her kitchen counter in her housecoat with a glass of water she had not yet drunk. The map loaded on the third page. At the center, highlighted in orange for rezoning to mixed-use commercial, was a parcel on Shore Road in Dartmouth labeled Marsh Fabrication and Salvage, 6.2 acres, waterfront access, marine zoning variance pending. The glass shifted in her hand. She did not call anyone. She went to her desk. She worked until 1 in the morning with a yellow highlighter and a printed Halifax Regional Municipality Land Transfer Registry she had pulled from the public database. She drew lines in pencil between company names and filing dates. She opened the Nova Scotia Registry of Joint Stock Companies and began searching incorporated entities. By midnight, the pattern was on paper. Cloutier Waterfront Development had acquired 9 contiguous parcels along the Dartmouth waterfront over the past 22 months through 3 numbered companies: 313U1729 Nova Scotia Limited, Harbour Reach Properties Incorporated, and Tidal Shore Holdings. All 3 shared the same registered agent, a legal services office in a strip mall in Bedford, on the same street as a dry cleaner and a cell phone repair shop. The agent had filed 214 limited liability entities in the past 7 years. Of the 9 parcels, 8 were assembled. The one remaining, the one without which there was no unbroken waterfront access for the proposed development, was Marsh Fabrication and Salvage. The estimated post-rezoning value of the full corridor, $38 million. She drove to the yard the next morning without coffee and without a call ahead. She brought the maps. She spread them on the hood of Everett's truck and stood beside him while he looked. He did not seem surprised. He nodded once, slowly, the way someone nods when a thing they already suspected is finally on paper in front of them. Cloutier's been pushing on this yard since 2021. He just couldn't say why in public. Why does he want it? Old story. He studied the map. The short version is that 2 years before my wife died, I filed a report with the Federal Marine Safety Office about falsified maintenance records on 3 vessels contracted through Cloutier Marine Logistics, a subsidiary he dissolved 8 months later. The report went to Transport Canada. Cloutier lost his federal charter. And your wife. He looked at the map for a long count. The report and what happened to Hazel are separate things. I'll leave them that way. She did not push. Pip came around from behind the office with a flat piece of granite she had found near the drainage ditch. She walked straight to Claudette and held it up. There was a fossil spiral in the surface, a small ancient shell pressed into the gray stone. Claudette turned it over in her hands. She put it in her coat pocket. She did not know what else to do with it. Everett watched his daughter put something into this woman's hands for the 3rd time. He said nothing. He went back to the map. That afternoon, the younger man from the government suburban, whose name turned out to be Corporal Arsenault, retired, came by the yard with a foil dish of his wife Bernadette's tourtière for Adele. He set it in the office, said hello to Pip, and on his way out, he caught Everett at the gate. "Sir, there are documents in my storage locker you should know still exist. The full Transport Canada submission. The unredacted version. When you're ready." "I told you to shred those." "I didn't. I won't." He climbed into his car. "Commissioner Desrochers has been asking about the Cloutier file for 2 months. He's not asking for nothing." Everett stood at the gate after the car had gone. He put his hand on the post. The harbor wind came off the water and he stood in it for a while. He did not call after Arsenault. He did not need to. That night, Claudette sat at her kitchen table with the granite fossil beside her maps. She had been turning the stone over in her hands without noticing it. She set it down next to the highlighted registry pages. She looked at both for a long time. She did not know exactly what she was doing. She knew only that she had begun. Fontaine Infrastructure Group and Marsh Fabrication and Salvage signed a memorandum of understanding 11 days after Claudette had told Everett Marsh his site wasn't viable. The document was 4 pages. The first 3 were standard. The 4th page was a clause Claudette had written herself at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning on a Friday, in pencil first and then in ink. In the event of any third-party rezoning application, municipal variance request, or eminent domain action affecting the Marsh Fabrication parcel at Shore Road, Dartmouth, Fontaine Infrastructure Group shall provide full legal representation, procedural support, and financial coverage without limit of time or cost until such action is resolved or withdrawn. Everett read the page twice. Pip's name doesn't appear anywhere, not in trust, not in any filing, not in any public record connected to this. It doesn't. He picked up the pen. He set it down once. He picked it up again. He signed. The following Sunday, the sky over McNabb's Island was the kind of blue that only comes to the Atlantic coast in late October, when the summer has completely given up and the light decides it has nothing left to hide. Pip asked Claudette to come with them to the island on the morning ferry. Everett stood on the gravel beach near the ferry landing and watched them walk ahead along the shoreline. Pip had taken off her shoes and left them beside a log. She was carrying them in one hand and a piece of kelp in the other. Claudette walked beside her in rubber boots that were new and slightly too clean for the occasion. "Do you know about great blue herons?" "Not much. They wait. They don't chase." Mrs. DeChazen says that's a skill." Pip held up the kelp. "Daddy says patience is knowing the difference between waiting and giving up." Claudette looked at that for a moment. "Your dad says a lot of good things. He says them quiet. You have to listen." A line of great blue herons, 4 of them, crossed the channel in the gray-gold light above the water, single file, their wing beats slow and unhurried. Pip stopped counting at 4. Everett stood on the beach with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched his daughter walk beside this woman who had come to take his yard and had stayed to keep it. His shoulders held themselves differently than they had in 3 years. He noticed. He would not have said so. That night, after Pip was asleep and the dishes were washed, Everett sat on the back step of the house in Woodside and looked across the water toward the lights of the naval base and the container terminal, and the thin orange line of the bridge. He did not pray. He did not speak. He sat with his hands on his knees and listened to the harbor. At 10:15, his phone rang. Arsenal's number. He let it ring twice. "Sir, the commissioner wants to move on the Cloutier file. Transport Canada has reopened the inquiry file. Transport Canada has reopened the inquiry. New case officer, different division. They want a civilian technical lead who held the original submission. You're being asked to participate. Voluntarily. Your terms." Everett was quiet. "He also asked me to tell you that he was the one who recommended the original classification of your 2021 submission. He said he was protecting program timelines. He said he was wrong." Another silence. "Tell the commissioner I'll think about it. Not for the file. For the next crew that goes out in a vessel that somebody signed off on without looking." "Understood." He set the phone down. He looked at the water. The tide was going out, and the harbor was making the slow sound it makes when it has no particular hurry. Adele Baudreau was admitted to the QEI Health Sciences Center on the 1st of November. Her son called Everett from the waiting room at 9 in the evening. The doctor said 2 to 3 weeks, possibly less. Claudette came to the hospital the next night. She did not say much. She brought a container of the dark roast coffee in a thermos and set it on the bedside table. Adele took 1 cup and told her it was exactly right. In a thin voice, Adele told Claudette that her own father had worked the Dartmouth waterfront in the 70s, that he had known Everett's father the way waterfront men know each other, by the weight of their handshakes, and that the world has a way of returning to the same places if you live long enough to let it. Everett sat in the chair by the window. He watched Claudette sit with Adele the way someone sits with a person they are choosing to know. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Everett Marsh accepted the Transport Canada Civilian Technical Advisor position on the 15th of November. He did not change the name on the yard gate. He drove to the federal office in Dartmouth twice a week. The rest of the week he was in his welding jacket. Fontaine Infrastructure and Marsh Fabrication signed their full partnership agreement for the Federal Coast Guard facility assessments on the same day. The contract was 27 pages. The 28th was a rider Claudette had written in pencil first and then in ink, at her kitchen table, at an hour she would not mention to anyone. The Hazel Marsh Memorial Bursary, 3% of net annual contract revenue, in perpetuity, to be directed to vocational marine training scholarships for children of Nova Scotia Coast Guard and Marine Rescue personnel. The bursary shall carry the full name, Hazel Louise Marsh. Everett read the rider once. He set the pen flat on the table. He was quiet for nearly 2 minutes. She used to say the water takes and the water gives back. She believed that. He picked up the pen. She would have been the one to write this. He signed. Adele Boudreau died on a Sunday morning in November. The kind of morning that arrives quietly on the Atlantic coast with cold light and no wind, as though the day itself has decided to be careful. The service was held at St. Bridget's on Pleasant Street in Dartmouth. The church was small and full. Arsenault came with Bernadette and sat in the second pew. Commissioner Desrochers did not come. He sent a handwritten note that Everett read on the back step the following morning and did not show anyone. Henri Fontaine drove down from Bedford for the service. He stood at the back of the church beside his daughter. After the burial in the parking lot, he walked over to Everett and held out his hand. They shook. A long count. Chief Warrant Officer. Mr. Fontaine. That was enough. Adele's will, 3 pages long and written in her own hand, and witnessed by her son and her parish priest, left Everett her bread pans, her mustard pickle recipe in a sealed envelope marked for when Pip is old enough to make it herself, and a letter she had written at some point in the past 2 years and had not told him about, which he read standing at the kitchen counter while Pip slept, and which he folded afterward and put in the desk drawer beneath the tide tables and the delivery manifests, in the place where he kept the things he did not need to look at often but needed to know were there. The Halsey, the Arsenault family, Bernadette's cousin and her husband, and their daughter, came to dinner at the Marsh House in Woodside on the last Friday of November. Bernadette brought a pot of seafood chowder. Their daughter Mathilde brought a deck of cards and a small stuffed seal she pressed into Pip's hands at the door as though it were a very serious matter. Claudette came because she had been invited, not because she had figured out what to call herself yet. Pip fell asleep on the sofa after dessert with Mathilde's seal tucked under her arm. Bernadette hugged Claudette at the door for a moment longer than acquaintances do. Arsenault carried Mathilde to the car and came back to shake Everett's hand. Claudette stayed to wash dishes. Everett dried. They did not talk much. The water ran. The old fluorescent light over the sink hummed. She washed a bowl. He dried it and set it on the rack. She washed a cup. He dried it and set it on the rack. She washed a cup. He dried it. They moved through the pile in a rhythm that neither of them had rehearsed. When the last dish was done, Claudette took the granite fossil with the shell spiral out of her coat pocket. She had been carrying it for 3 weeks and set it on the windowsill above the sink. It sat there between the dish soap and a small jar of sea glass. It was not a declaration. It was a kitchen. It was a window. It was a Wednesday night in Woodside with the harbor moving in the dark outside and a child asleep in the next room. 6 weeks later, in the second week of January, the harbor ice had begun to form at the edges of the coves, and the light on the water turned a pale silver gray, that Dartmouth people recognize as the light of a coast that is not done with winter yet. Claudette drove to Marsh Fabrication and Salvage on a Thursday afternoon in her old down coat, no hard hat, no folder. She parked beside Everett's truck and walked through the gate without calling ahead. She no longer called ahead. Everett was at the dock at the back of the yard where the gravel met the planking and the planking met the water. He had a length of dock line in his hand. Pip stood at his elbow in her school coat, her backpack still on. He was teaching her to tie a bowline. Rabbit comes out of the hole, around the tree, back into the hole. Pip tied it wrong on the first try. He showed her again without comment. She tied it right on the second try and held both ends out to him with the look of someone who has just solved something important. There it is. She tried a third time without being asked, faster and surer. He untied it and handed it back. She tied it again and held it up. He looked up then and saw Claudette at the edge of the dock. He did not say anything. He held out the end of the dock line to her. She walked over. She did not know how to tie a bowline. She said so. Pip showed her. Rabbit, tree, hole. Claudette tied it wrong on the first try. Pip retied it for her without any particular patience, which was the most honest thing anyone had done for Claudette in some time. Everett watched. He did not say anything. The harbor went flat silver in the late afternoon light, and the cold came off the water in a clean, steady way, and the three of them stood on the dock at the end of the yard, where the gravel ran out, and there was nothing left but the tide. After a while, Pip ran ahead to the ladder at the side of the dock to look for ice crystals in the brackish water at the base of the pilings. Everett looked at the water. "You told me this site wasn't viable." "I know." "You came back anyway." She looked at the harbor. "I came back because your daughter gave me a rock." She paused. "And because my father told me I was wrong. And because—" She stopped. She started again. "Because the things that are worth keeping don't always look like it from the road." He was quiet for a moment. The harbor ice ticked softly at the dock pilings. He turned the dock line over in his hands once, then reached out and set the back of his hand against the back of hers. Just that. Barely anything. Everything. Down at the ladder, Pip held up a piece of harbor ice the size of her palm and called out something neither of them caught, but both of them heard. That evening, on the other side of the harbor, in a federal office in Halifax, a clerk delivered an envelope to Commissioner Desrocher's outer office. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Everett Marsh, Pip Marsh, and Claudette Fontaine at the end of a dock in Dartmouth, the harbor behind them, the light going silver over the water. Desrochers took the photograph into his office. He looked at it for a long count. He set it on the corner of his desk beside the older photograph. A Federal Marine Commendation Ceremony, 2018. Chief Warrant Officer Everett Marsh receiving the Governor General's Medal for bravery, his daughter in his arms, 3 years old, one hand fisted in the lapel of his dress uniform. He stepped back. He looked at the two photographs together. He did not speak. He put his hand on his desk and bowed his head once, the way a man does when something he could not have arranged has arranged itself correctly. Then he went back to work. He had told Everett Marsh to go back to his yard. She had been the one who stayed. And for the first time since the harbor had taken Hazel, the silence at the end of the dock held something other than absence.